Have you ever looked at someone and instantly made a judgment? It might be because of the clothes they're wearing, the way they've styled their hair, their makeup, even their ethnicity or their gender. Unfortunately, that is what happened to Sophie Lancaster and her boyfriend Robert Maltby. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This video is going to be a hard one. I do advise viewers' discretion over this one. It does contain some descriptions of some violent acts and it's quite graphic. But this case involves hate and prejudice, and it's not a nice case, but it's one that I feel very strongly about, and so I feel like I need to talk about it. Sophie Lancaster was born on the 26th of November 1986. She lived in Lancashire with her mother Sylvia, her dad John, and her older brother Adam. She was quite an introvert child. She preferred to be alone and reading. Sylvia said that when she was young, she used to come home from school, instantly grab herself a snack and a drink and a book, and then that was where you would find her. She spent most of her childhood alone and indoors. When she was indoors, she had confidence. This is where she was comfortable. I mean, we're all like that. We're in our own space. We're allowed to be who we are. We're allowed to express ourselves completely. So we're comfortable. But as soon as she stepped outside, she was shy. As I say, she was an introvert. She didn't want to talk to people. She just wanted to be left alone to her own devices. And this was for most of her childhood. But as she started to get older and get to her early teen years, she started to come out of her shell a bit. She was still quite shy at home, but she was making friends at school. And she was slowly coming out of her shell. And Sylvia said that one summer, in her late, so probably about 16, I think she said, it got to the summer and she went to her friend's house to stay, and she just didn't want to come home. So she ended up spending like the whole summer holidays there. She was there for 6 weeks. And Sylvia said that when she came home, she walked through the door and it was a completely different child. She walked in and she changed her hair. She dyed it black. She now had these little dreadlocks in it. She had got some piercings. She'd done her makeup. And Sylvia said that she walked in and she just looked really cool, which was wonderful to hear, because like being a supportive parent it's top of my list. And I completely can relate, because like, as you can see, I'm alternative. And my kids are alternative. My middle child is currently 17 and she's just dyed her hair red and she's got snakebite piercings. She's dressing more alternative. So this really, really struck home. It's a wonderful thing to be able to look at your child who has been very introvert and just see them coming out of their shell and see them becoming the person that they're meant to be becoming. It turned out that Sophie had actually like discovered punk rock music and the community, and so she was living that. She was living through that community. She started to dress more goth-like or alternative. She had her dreads, she had her piercings, and she came out of herself. She started to make friends through the community. She started going to local gigs, so not always the big gigs, but like the small ones that would be in local pubs, and she met other alternative people through these gigs, and she made new friends. Instead of being introverted and like staying indoors and avoiding people, Sophie went out. Sophie was enjoying herself. Through these new friends, she met a guy called Robert Maltby, and the two of them just clicked. Like, they were very similar people. They'd both had introverted childhoods. They were both into this scene. They were both pierced. They were both expressing themselves through their clothing and their music taste and their new friendships. And they just clicked. They just got each other. And very quickly, they were in a relationship and they were just each other's perfect person. And they spent all their time together. When they would go out, if people would shout out abusive comments, they were able to laugh off these comments and just brush them off and move on. After a couple of years together, it was now getting to the end of college years, and Robert wanted to go to university to study art. And Sophie wasn't quite there yet, so she decided that she was going to take a year out, and then after the year out, she was then going to study English literature. They were both going to be in the same city. They were both going to study in Manchester. So when Robert left, Sophie basically went with him. And they ended up living in a place called Bacup, which was about 7 miles away from where Sophie was living with her mum. And they just spent all of their time together and had a wonderful time. They were living in this beautiful little bubble. They were happy. They were content. They weren't harming anybody. They weren't doing anything wrong. They were just living their life and being happy. Over time, the harassment that the couple were receiving got worse. Instead of just being shouted at, there were 3 separate occasions where they were actually assaulted. They didn't report this. They didn't tell their parents. They just kind of internalized it and dealt with it together. They weren't people who ever fought back either. It's like they stood there and they took the assault. And I get it, because when I was a kid, I was beaten up. It was like the only time I was ever involved in a fight. I just stood there and I took the punches until the person got bored and left. So I do understand, but it hurts inside that they didn't feel like they could tell somebody. But as I say, at least they had each other. We then come to the 10th of August 2007. Robert was 21, Sophie was 20 at this time. They were attending a social gathering at a friend's house, so they were going to have a few drinks. They were just going to chill out. There wasn't going to be many of them. It's just like a few people at a house, not a house party or anything like that. Just a gathering of mates. And they were there until just before midnight, at which point they started to walk home. It was about a 2-mile walk home. They were in high spirits. As I say, they'd been drinking. They weren't legless. They weren't fucked, but they'd had a few drinks. They were merry as fuck. And they were just enjoying each other's company walking home. After about 20 minutes of the walk, they came to an open shop. So they popped in. They got themselves a few more drinks for the walk, some cigarettes. And they started talking to a group of girls outside the shop. The girls were really interested in their style. They were really interested in the alternative way that they looked, and Sophie's hair. They loved Sophie's hair. Now, Sophie would, as I said, had like black dreads, but she also used to put colour into them as well. Sometimes bright green, sometimes bright red. So she must have looked amazing. So these girls stopped her. They wanted to talk to her, and they were just chatting away, having a good time. They then said to the girls about meeting up at the park. So Sophie and Robert got to the park. Now, when they got to the park, there were a group of 5 lads hanging around the entrance of the park. Instantly, Robert and Sophie dropped their heads. It's the whole don't make eye contact thing. I think it's like a natural instinct. If you think like a wild pack of dogs, for example, or something similar, like if you don't want to cause trouble and you don't want to be attacked, you kind of just put your head down, don't make eye contact, just try and get past without being seen. And this is what they did, and they were hoping that the boys would leave them alone. Unfortunately, the boys did start shouting out at them. They were shouting things like goth and mosher. If you don't know what a mosher is, somebody that would go into the mosh pit at a concert. And they were just generally being like derogatory comments. And unfortunately, Bacup was what's known as a monoculture. So I live in Bristol, as I've said before, and I live in a very multicultural city. It's beautiful. You meet people of all genders and all sexualities and all races and all religions, and everybody is just in this huge mixing pot of Bristol, and it's wonderful. But then there are places that are called monocultures, that are small cultures that haven't got the diversity, and therefore the people there think differently. So to these boys, Sophie and Robert would have seemed very different. I can't think of the right words. I don't want to say anything derogatory, because Sophie and Robert are my kind of people. But these boys were in their tracksuits, and as I said, they were shouting derogatory things at Robert and Sophie, calling them freaks, calling them moshers, calling them goths, blah, blah, blah. And they followed them through the park, continuing to shout this abuse at them. Robert and Sophie just kept their heads down and just kept on moving. And then they got to the skate park area. And when they got there, someone shouted, "He's a mosher, hit him." And before Robert knew what was happening, someone punched him in the face. At which point, Robert laughed at the punch. Whether it was a nervous laugh or a derogatory laugh, we don't know. We just know that some form of laughter left Robert's lips. And the boys did not like this at all. And all 5 of them just set on him. They punched him, they kicked him, they got him on the floor, and once he was on the floor, they just kept kicking him. They were kicking him in the neck, they were stomping on his head, they were stomping on his neck, kicking him in the back. They just brutalized him, and it's absolutely horrifying thing to think about. And Sophie was left alone. Sophie was stood on the sidelines watching. She didn't know what to do. I wish there was a way to go back and tell her to run, because she didn't. She stood there. She didn't run. She didn't have, I'm guessing she didn't have a phone because she didn't call anybody. She just watched in disbelief. When the boys got bored, they stood up and walked off. At which point, Sophie dropped to her knees and just picked up Robert's bleeding head and cradled it and just started sobbing, like wailing. And I can't think of anything else that you would do in that kind of situation. She's just bawling her eyes out. But unfortunately, those tears and that crying brought her back to the attention of the boys. The boys turned around and one of them just kicked her in the back of the head. Sophie fell to the floor, and they continued to kick her in the way that they had been Robert. They were kicking her neck, they were kicking her head, they were stomping on her, there's even eyewitness accounts of saying that the boys were jumping on her head. A 15-year-old girl heard the commotion in the park. There were teenagers in, like, this is a big park, there were other teenagers around, and a 15-year-old girl overheard what was happening, and she saw some of the violence, and then she called 999. And it is the most horrific 999 call I've heard. And obviously I've listened to quite a lot now, and this one just, it's horrific to hear. This poor child is bearing witness to this horrendous attack that she should never have to see, that Sophie should never have had to go through.
I can see the ambulance police right here, yeah. Yeah. I can't see where it's going.
It will do, don't worry. Calm down for me.
It's coming. Please send the ball to me.
And we're not going anywhere, but I need you to calm down. I need you to be able to tell the paramedics if it's anything, you can tell them, but you stay calm.
When the paramedics arrived, the damage that had been done to Sophie and to Robert meant that the paramedics were unable to tell the sex of either of them. They found Robert's ID in his pocket, it was in his wallet, so they were able to ID him. Unfortunately, they didn't have any ID for Sophie. They obviously whisked them off to hospital and got them into theatre as soon as possible. By the time they got to the hospital, both of them had already slipped into comas, and the doctors were very concerned about the chances of survival, and if they did survive, the chances of brain damage being incredibly high. So the police contacted Robert's family, and they were able to ask them if they had any idea who the girl with him was, and of course his family were like, well, that would be Sophie. That's Sophie's his girlfriend. Why wouldn't it not be Sophie? At which point they then tried to contact Sylvia. Sylvia wasn't home. She had got up early, gone to the gym, gone shopping. So they ended up leaving a card, and I didn't know they did this, and it just makes me think of the post office leaving a card. Hi, we called, you weren't home. But apparently it said on this card that they had urgent business and please could she call them back. So she got home. When she walked in the front door, she found this card on the doorstep. She went to her phone. As she was looking at her phone, she saw that she had a lot of missed calls and messages from Adam. So instead of calling the police immediately, she actually phoned Adam, who said, have you heard? Sophie's in hospital. She's in ICU. So Sylvia just went straight to the hospital. Now, while they were in hospital, the police were obviously investigating what happened. There were, as I said, there were a lot of other kids in the park at the time. And so the police questioned as many people as they could find. So the police tried to question all of these kids, and none of them were talking. The police couldn't tell if that was because they didn't know anything, or if they were just, keeping quiet because of, like, don't rat on people kind of bullshit that goes around. But the police actually came up with another tactic, and they sent out a load of junior officers in the hope that they could relate to the kids a bit better. And it sounds like a fucking ridiculous plan, I'm not going to lie. I did kind of roll my eyes at the idea of it. But weirdly, it worked. The kids started talking. And within, like, a day, I think it was a day or two, the police knew the group that had been involved. There were 5 kids in this group. There was Daniel Mallet, who was 17. Joseph Hulme and Danny Hulme, who were brothers. They were 17 and 16. Ryan Herbert, who was 16. And Brendan Harris, who was 15. The ages of these kids just makes me angry that they're so young, but this violent. I understand that it was the time when, like, an ASBO was like a fucking badge of honor, but even so, the idea that this was their course of action, so it turns out they'd been in the park for the night, they'd been drinking, they'd apparently had sex, they were just full of fucking testosterone and I am man bullshit. All 5 of them were arrested and charged with GBH on Robert at first. But when they were brought in for questioning, they were all just being gobby and, like, joking around. And even Brendan's mum, because he was 15, so his mum was with him, but even his mum was joking around the whole time as if it wasn't serious, which is fucking disgusting, because these is, like, this is 2 people's lives that were hanging in the balance, and these people were joking about after being the ones to put them in the hospital. And it's just this case makes me fucking angry. I can't help it. I apologize, but this case makes me so fucking angry because I relate to it and because my kids are living the fucking alternative lifestyle, and if anybody ever touched my kids, I'd want to kill them. So this makes me angry. I can't contain that anger. Robert was very lucky in the sense that his injuries started to heal quite quickly. And actually after 10 days, he did wake up from his coma. Unfortunately, though, he had no memory of the attack. Sophie, unfortunately, was not as lucky, and her injuries just didn't seem to be getting any better. It turned out that her wounds were worse than what Robert had received. The police sent a pathologist to assess Sophie's injuries, and they were able to ascertain that the injuries were not caused by just one person. Her ears were black and full of pus. She was covered in bruises, and she had shoe prints on either side of her face. She had a part of her scalp missing from where they had pulled her hair so hard that it had pulled out part of her scalp. And she was just lying in the hospital bed and she was not recovering. She was moved to a special neurology department at a different hospital because where she was, they weren't equipped to look after her. And when she got to this hospital, they did some extra scans, and unfortunately Sophie's brain didn't have any activity. So it was decided that her life support would be turned off. The night before she was to be switched off, Sylvia came to the hospital and she brushed her hair because it was the only part of her that she could get to because of all the wires. And then she lay down in the bed beside her. And they switched off the machine and Sylvia just held her until she passed. And it's the thought of having to go through that is just, I can't, like, as a mum, or just as a human, fuck being a mum, I just, like, as a human, I can't fathom how much that must have hurt. Excuse me. So, on August the 24th, 2007, at the age of 20, Sophie Lancaster passed away. This now meant that all 5 boys were charged with Sophie's murder. But the police suspected the 2 young boys more than the elder boys. So both Herbert and Harris had had previous run-ins with the police for other violent attacks. Literally days before they attacked Robert and Sophie, they had been involved in another fight which had involved them kicking someone to the ground, and very similar style, but luckily hadn't been as severe as this time. So the police were very suspicious of them, and they managed to get a warrant to retrieve the clothing from these 2 boys that they were wearing the night of the attack. What also happened is, not wanting to be associated with murder, the 3 elder boys sung like fucking canaries. They admitted they had been part of the assault on Robert, but they said that it was just Herbert and Harris who had attacked Sophie. They had been there, but they had not been involved. And so the 3 elder boys were allowed out on bail, and Herbert and Harris were detained. While they were detained, they were able to have their one phone call, and actually on the phone call, I don't understand how the kid didn't realise he was being recorded, but Herbert spoke to his mum And while on the phone, she said something along the lines of, "Don't worry, if you weren't involved in the attack like you say you weren't, then you'll be okay." And he replied, "But I was." How he thought he could have that kind of conversation over a police telephone line and not be heard or recorded. Like, does he want a little message at the beginning? These phone calls will be recorded. So the police then had that. They then bugged one of their own vans that they were then going to use to escort Herbert and Harris to the detention centre. And then while in the van, they got Herbert talking about the attack and the fact that he kicked Sophie's head like a fucking football, which then matched some of the evidence because that's exactly how some of the other kids described the attack. And then the results came back from the lab, and on the clothes were both Robert's blood and Sophie's blood. So they then had their DNA evidence. Throughout everything, Herbert just said no comment. He made no comment on anything. Before he went to trial, Herbert's defense attorney actually tried to have his murder charge changed to manslaughter due to diminished responsibility because he was autistic. So the courts brought in somebody to assess him and test him, because you have to be able to prove that kind of claim. And he was not anywhere on the spectrum. So he still went ahead with a murder charge. So on March 10th, 2008, they went to trial. And on the day of the trial, everything went a bit tits up for the police. So the police had intended to use something called joint enterprise, which is proving that even though the other boys hadn't taken part in the murder, if they had been there coercing or anything along those kind of lines, if they had been involved in any way, they could also be charged with the murder. But on the first day of the trial, Herbert actually stood up, and for the first time, he admitted that he was guilty for the murder of Sophie. So the police came away from that and reassessed and decided to drop the pursuit of joint enterprise. Therefore, the elder three were only charged with GBH, and the younger two would continue to be tried for the murder of Sophie. Harris even tried to point a finger at Herbert, saying it was his fault and that he wanted Sophie dead because she was a witness. But after going through all of the evidence and listening to witnesses, they were found guilty of her murder. So the sentences for the boys ended up with Malik getting 4 years and 4 months for the assault on Robert, the Holm brothers getting 5 years and 10 months for the assault on Robert. Harris actually ended up with life sentence with a minimum of 18 years, and Herbert was given a lesser sentence because of his admittance of guilt, so he was given 16 years and 3 months. This was actually appealed as well. The appeal basically saying that he should have been given even less because of the admittance, and so his sentence was actually dropped by 9 months, so he was actually given 15 years and 6 months in total. In the aftermath of everything that had happened, Sophie's family and friends ended up setting up a charity. It's called the Sophie Lancaster Foundation. One of their friends came up with a tagline for Sophie, and it's to stamp out prejudice, hatred, and intolerance everywhere. And Sylvia herself started to attend schools and prisons and music concerts and just all other events to try and educate people about hatred against the alternative community. There is a website, and they are still to this day raising money and still campaigning. Unfortunately, Sylvia did pass away in April 2025, but the work that she started is still going. They are doing a wonderful service to the alternative community, and to be honest, to other communities as well, because learning ways to deal with prejudice and hatred is not just going to affect people in the alternative community. It's going to affect people from many, many other communities as well. I will leave the website link in the description underneath this video. Please check them out. Just as a little update before I finish the video, in 2020, Herbert's sentence was reduced by another year because of his well-behaved actions in prison. He has been through the educational system. I believe he got himself a degree, and has been well-behaved. In August 2020, he was then moved to an open prison, and then in March 2022, he was released on license. There will be things that he can do, things that he can't do, places he can't go, and he will have to check in with his probation officer. Harris became eligible for parole in 2025, although he has been diagnosed with schizophrenia while he's been in prison, and is under medical care. Hatred is a learnt response. So maybe these kids were victims as well. Maybe they were victims of their community, of their families, of a lack of knowledge of other people being different. I don't know. There needs to be more education of how people are allowed to be different. I mean, it's 2026. People are still intolerant of other people. If people don't understand something, then they're intolerant of it. They don't want to understand it. People attack other people because they don't like that they are different to them. That needs to change. Anyway. As I say, this video was hard to make, but it was something that I needed to talk about. It was something that people need to remember. It's a case that people cannot forget. If you've made it through the video, I appreciate you. Please do click that subscribe button and that like button because it all helps me. If you have any cases that you would like me to look into, or if you just have any comments, please feel free to leave them below. And I will see you in the next video. Look after yourselves, please.